game? Don't, students,
Don't talk
don't
about
say.
it. La, 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 la.
I made Chris wait too.
I wasn't sure Sean was gonna be here tonight.
I'm glad you said something.
We set up 3 TVs in our lunchroom and had a party. Yeah. I wanted.
Good evening, and welcome to the special called board meeting of the Savannah-Chatham County Public School System on this Wednesday, July 15th, 2026. We do have a board member that is joining us on the phone. Dr. Ringman is calling in for this. Let's start. Let me be assured that we have posted this meeting. I've been assured of that. If we'd all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'll now ask for approval of the agenda.
I move that the agenda be approved as presented.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you. All right, I will now accept a motion to accept the consent agenda. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right. Now we will have our calendar year, fiscal year 2027 final recommended tax millage levy presentation.
And as we make our presentation tonight, I'd just like to bring a few comments, if I may.
Please.
Good evening to the public, our employees, the Board of Education, and our finance team, and as well as our chiefs and other department leaders. Tonight represents the culmination of a very long, comprehensive budget and millage process. And this process has required of us significant analysis, sustained engagement, and very difficult choices. I want to thank the Board of Education for its thoughtful deliberation, our employees and our team for their willingness to lean in to changing the financial environment. And I would like to thank members of the public who have shared their questions, their concerns, and perspectives throughout this process. There have been and will continue to be different opinions about the approach, different priorities, and different philosophies. And I see these as a legitimate part of the governance process when it comes to establishing a budget. Regardless of the individual budget philosophies, we do all collectively share the responsibility to protect the quality of public education and ensure that the district remains financially and operationally sound. This year's budget reflects months of work, disciplined review, careful choices, and many trade-offs. It introduces new structures, greater scrutiny of expenditures, while also advancing 3 essential commitments. Commitment number 1 is fueling our strategic plan. Commitment number 2 is meeting our mandatory and unavoidable costs. And number 3 is maintaining, to the extent possible, a baseline experience for our students, families, and employees. We have worked to make reductions this year and in previous years in areas where we believe the district can absorb them without significantly diminishing the quality of teaching and learning, the support and safety that we owe to our students, and for covering the essential operations and safety components of our school district. The millage rate tonight is the final decision in this budget cycle. It establishes the local revenue required to support the budget, and that is what is being advanced to this board. This decision is not just a number, it's about the resources necessary to operate our schools, meet our legal and financial obligations, and sustain a quality baseline experience, as well as fuel a new strategic plan. Our revenue environment has changed. Declining enrollment, changes in property tax legislation, rising operational costs, and increasing mandatory obligations require us to right-size the district into a more sustainable operating model. We cannot address this new fiscal reality through temporary adjustments, the fund balance, or reductions to non-personnel expenditures only. The work ahead of us is real, and as we enter the new phase, I am also pleased to formally introduce Ms. Lisa Howell, if I'll have her to stand. She is our new Chief Financial Officer. And Ms. Howell is joining us at a very pivotal time in our work. Her leadership will be central to strengthening the multi-year forecasting that we need to do, the financial controls, the transparency and accountability, and the long-term planning. And I'm excited that she is on the team and will be helping lead the work of aligning our resources more closely with enrollment, strategic priorities, operational needs, and measurable outcomes. The work ahead is going to require us to have discipline, courage, transparency, and shared accountability. And we must make the district more efficient without lowering our expectations for excellence. We must protect what matters most while also being willing to change structures, practices, and investments. This is the responsibility before us tonight and the work that I am fully committed to. And with that said, I'd like to welcome our financial advisors and partners to the podium to guide us through our presentation for this evening on the final millage rate adoption.
Good evening, Board. As many of you know, I'm John Jenkins with Alvarez and Marsal. I've been working with Dr. Watts and her executive cabinet on the budget process over the past few months. Today, I'm joined by, I want to introduce our colleague Ingrid Gardner, who just joined our team in place of Sheena. So I'll step aside and give her a few moments to introduce herself.
Good evening. So good evening, President Moss, to Superintendent Watts, fellow board members, all of you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. I am obviously not Mike Potter, but he has asked me to step in on his behalf. Unfortunately, he had a conflict and could not be here with the change in the dates of the millage hearing, so he was quite disappointed that he would not be here. I just by way of a short introduction, I have been with the firm. I'm a senior director with Alvarez and Marsal. I've been with the firm for about 18 years. I am in the education practice. I work in K-12 and higher ed. I have worked primarily in financial sustainability and accountability across multiple school districts, Prince George's County Public Schools, District of Columbia Public Schools, Denver, Houston. I've been sort of multiple places, and then obviously in higher ed as well. So with that, I just wanted to introduce myself. I am also here just to support John. He, as you all know, has very deep into the details, so I'll let him present today and just be here as a support to him. But good to meet you all and hope to engage with you further. Thank you.
And so really quickly before we begin, I know you all are eager to hear updates on Sheena, and we don't have news just yet, but we will keep you posted when we hear. So just to give you all sort of an overview of our agenda, all the slides you'll see today are things that you've seen in the past. And so, hopefully these will be refreshers and recaps of information that we've shared with you over the past few weeks. But we're going to start out just looking at our timeline, where we are in the budget approval timeline and the millage rate adoption timeline. We'll do a quick recap, refresher of the FY27 budget as adopted in June. We'll spend some time talking about some of the recent legislation that has changed our revenue picture moving forward. And then we'll break for some discussion on the millage rate. To start on our timeline, so we have an adjusted or an amended budget timeline that's a little bit different than the one that you all would have been used to in the past, primarily due to delays in receiving our tax digest. And so on June 24th, we approved the budget for the fiscal year, and then thereafter we had a few, the budget for the fiscal year along with the tentative millage rate. The weeks following that, we had a few millage rate hearings, and then earlier today we had the final millage rate hearing, and now we're at the point where we can share our final presentation on the millage rate and then begin to vote on the final millage rate for fiscal year 27. Before we jump too deep into the revenue side, we wanted to do a refresher or a recap of the budget that we voted on June 24th. And in summary, the budget for FY27 is $704.7 million. Now, this represents a 3.3% increase from the prior year's revised budget. Now, that 3.3% represents the smallest growth between revised to revised in the past few years. And what's important about that is sort of that smaller growth that we're seeing this year only holds valid if the district is able to maintain that discipline as it comes towards budget amendments. Majority of the costs in this budget are related to salary and benefit expenditures or personnel costs, as we discussed a little bit more thoroughly at the last meeting. As a recap, the approved budget that we voted on June 24th does a few things. And this is a budget that, Dr. Watts and her executive cabinet believe in, and that it can support students, serve students and support teachers, but still is responsive to some of the constraints that we're seeing in terms of the revenue landscape. To start, so the 3.3% increase enables a district to continue to provide sort of that standard baseline experience and meet all the mandatory funding requirements, as well as make a few key strategic investments that are in line with a strategic plan. The budget supports teachers by providing a 2% COLA increase, which in combination with the step increases that are mandated by your pay scale, have a combined impact on average of about 4%, which slightly outpaces inflation. And the last thing that this budget does that's important to call out is it maintains about $3.3 million in funding for staffing for positions that were previously funded by grants, which have since expired since the last fiscal year. And so we understand that, while we have this bridge year and while we're funding in those positions, there still needs to be a more thorough review of those programs and positions going into the next fiscal year. So the approved budget of $704.7 million, I talked a little bit on the last slide about what it does, but we do want to talk more about looking towards the future. And so for the future, what the proposed millage rate is to not increase it, but to maintain the current millage rate from fiscal year 26 at 17.331 mils, in combination with the use of $17.2 million in fund balance. And so while this year will really serve as a bridge, we do understand that in the future there's going to be more difficult and more challenging decisions that need to be made, namely workforce assessments and rethinking about the way that we're staffed and organized as a district. In terms of financial management capacity building, we want just to refresh everyone on where we've been, where we are now, where we're going. So to start back in fiscal year 24, it was the start of the new administration, which was operating under an inherited budget and still operating in the era of COVID funding. And obviously, since then, the availability of federal dollars is less than it was at that time, as well as probably having a more limited understanding of some of the capacity constraints that the district was facing at that time. In fiscal year 25, the administration started to recognize some of those constraints, and at that time, Dr. Watts reached out for external support in terms of identifying areas for improvements and starting that process, and our A&M team has been involved in that work over the past year. In fiscal year 26, our team presented our initial financial assessment to the board, to the Financial Advisory Committee, as well as to the leadership team. And sort of as a result of that, this year, the district has really been having targeted efforts on improving forecasting abilities, tightening up with a more rigorous budget process, as well as a lot of munis optimization and modernization. And so while we acknowledge that we've done a lot of work, we still know that there's much, much, much more work to do, and we're going to continue to do that work. In fiscal year 27, looking ahead, there's a lot of planned improvements and things that the district will need to consider this fiscal year that we're in now and then out into future years. Most importantly, probably, is the staffing assessment and planning for any reorganizational adjustments or staffing adjustments as needed, as that assessment highlights for us. The other thing is, over the past year, the department chiefs have gone through that budget process related to central office expenditures, but it would fit the district to expand that process to the schools and give principals, at individual schools, the knowledge, the power, the information to make decisions about their own budgets at their schools. The other thing that will be important for this fiscal year is continuing to challenge what is that baseline experience. There are things that this district has invested in that maybe other districts would not have done, and this has become part of your baseline experience for your students, and it's a reflection of board policy and things you believe in. But this year, it'll be important to challenge those things and to ask the question, can we still do this given our financial picture? Going into fiscal year 28, the important thing is that the district should really explore all options. No stone should be left unturned when it comes to setting up the district for a future of financial sustainability. And so, namely, that will probably be, adjusting the workforce as a result of the staffing model assessment plan that's coming this year. On the revenue side, we wanted to spend some time talking about the different pieces of legislation that have come through and changed our revenue picture. I won't spend a ton of time here because I know Mike gave a very thorough walkthrough of this House Bill 782 at our last presentation. But essentially what House Bill 782 does is it provides another homestead exemption for eligible homeowners that essentially removes growth in your taxable value in your home based upon the 2025 base tax year. And so we have an example on the left of one individual home, and in the case of this home, that was about $156 tax credit in that case of the individual home. But in aggregate, what that means for the district is there's a lot of money, a lot of dollars that came out of your tax digest. And so this year was about $500 million that came out of your tax digest due to this new exemption. And so that equates to about $8.7 million in revenue growth that we did not see this year. And just to clarify, it's not saying that we have less revenue than we had last year, but rather the speed at which the revenue is growing is beginning to curtail. And so we know that there's been a lot of discussion and there's some uncertainty around the exact way that this bill was implemented and interpreted. Despite that, and then we really recommend that the district plan for the latest verified numbers that you have and the verified revenue that you'll have this year, and not to make any changes to that plan until we can confirm that there are changes to the way this bill is implemented in the future. To give you all a sense of the scope in the context in how important this bill is and what it's done to your tax digest, we wanted to go through the history. And so over the past, in the chart to the left, you see we have the past 10 years of history for your tax digest. And what you'll notice is between 23 and 25, you had a big boom, right? A big real estate spike where your property values were growing very significantly, and it allowed you to reduce your millage rate every year and still receive more money in property taxes. Now, in this new environment, that's going to prove to be a little bit more challenging. And so by FY26, we saw that the growth from your housing market began to slow down, but that in combination with the new legislation has led to the lowest tax digest growth that you've seen in the past 10 years. And so in FY27, that was about 3.3%. Your average over the past 5 years has been about 10%, and then your average over the last 10 years has been about 7.7%. And so the growth has very significantly slowed down starting this year, and it's not the same that you've used to been seeing over the past few years. We wanted to provide just an updated picture of the revenue for fiscal year 27, and this is what we shared and presented at the 24th meeting and voted on tentatively. And so assuming the millage rate stays the same at 17.331, our total revenues are going to be projected to be $687.5 million. And so that's really a combination of slower growth than expected in the tax base, the new exemptions, expiring grant revenue, like all these things came together to create sort of slower growth this year than we've seen in the past. In terms of the millage rate, while the board did tentatively set a millage rate on the 24th, we do understand that the board would like to discuss different scenarios and the ability to adjust the millage rate. And so to be responsive to that, we've created a table here that sort of shows the impact of moving the millage rate and what that does to your revenue, what it does to the planned use of fund balance in this fiscal year, and then what it does to your reserve fund balance. And so, in short, about every 10th of a mil equates to about $2.4 million in revenue adjustments. And so on this table, we'll start at the gold row in the middle. And so this is sort of the current or proposed millage rate view. And in this scenario, we would have $17.2 million of fund balance use this year, which would leave us with about $35.3 million of fund balance in excess of the board policy minimum. Now, your board policy is that at all times you should have 2 months of expenditures in fund balance, which equates to about $120 million. And so in this gold scenario, we would have about $35 million in excess of that minimum. The two white rows indicate scenarios where we'd increase or decrease the millage rate by 0.15. And so this amount is in line with what you have done in the past over the last few years. And so for increasing, or rather decreasing the millage rate 0.15, that would mean $3.7 million less revenue, $20.9 million in planned use of fund balance, and then $31.6 million of revenue in excess of your board minimum. At the bottom in blue, we have what is the rollback rate. And so the rollback rate represents just under $7 million in less revenue, would require $24.1 million in planned use of fund balance, and then $28.4 million of revenue in excess of your board minimum. So what's important to know is decreasing the millage rate means that we would need more fund balance for this year, and then it starts to deplete some of the reserves we have in the fund balance. We also created sort of a chart here to articulate this a little better. On the left, you'll see a bar chart with your current fund balance. The orange represents your unassigned fund balance. The red represents the current year use of fund balance in this particular scenario, so if the millage rate stays the same at 17.331. And so essentially what happens is if we use that $17.2 million in unassigned fund balance, you'll have about $35 million in sort of rainy day funds or fund balance that's in excess of your minimum policy. Now, as we think about decreasing or adjusting the millage rate, obviously that's going to change. And so the lower we decrease the millage rate, the larger that red section will grow, and the closer we will push towards being right at or below the board minimum. There's a couple key considerations that you all should be mindful of as we're thinking about the millage rate. The first one is that use of fund balance or modest use of fund balance rather, is a very common tool among school districts to navigate uncertainty and balance budgets when needed. But what it is not is a long-term sustainable solution. And so, moreover, really what this represents is a bridge to buy time, to have the time to think about thoughtfully how we're organized as a district and to make difficult and challenging decisions, but is not intended to be a long-term solution that you keep doing year after year after year. The other thing that the district should really consider when adjusting the millage rate and the subsequent use of fund balance is the seasonality of expenditures. And so there are a lot of things that the school district has to pay for every single day, but the district does not collect revenue every single day. And so it's really important to make sure that we have enough there so that we don't have payroll challenges, or we can meet all the obligations and not find cash flow issues. And so the last thing that the district should really consider is planning for any revenue interruptions. And so while we have a millage rate to be set and property taxes to collect, there is a potential for challenges in collecting taxes at times. And so it also is important to consider how that can impact the district as well. In summary, we just wanted to refresh on our approved budget. And so this approved budget really included a combination of expenditure controls and planned use of fund balance to support the ongoing student experience. And so in this approved budget, we even scaled back some of the ambitions as it related to investments. For example, we reduced or lowered the COLA from 3% to 2%. We are going to incrementally introduce certain key investments, and then we removed other key investments that were not necessarily directly related to student outcomes. This fiscal year, additionally, the departments went through a period of a more rigorous budget process than normal. And so we were able to adjust department budgets where it was reasonable. We were able to close certain vacancies, and then also start really the beginning planning for the long-term financial picture and effort. in order to move forward, really what we're requesting is the board's support to not increase, but maintain the current millage rate of 17.331 and rely on fund balance in order to support investments in the student experience without very many disruptions while we still plan for an uncertain revenue environment in the future and make necessary adjustments in a thoughtful way. In closing, I would like to, well, one, open up for questions, but if there aren't, then I'll pass to Dr. Watts for closing comments.
Comments, questions? Ms. Hall.
On one of the slides, they mentioned school budget ownership, and I'd just like you to flesh that out a little bit. What more intense school budget ownership would look like?
Right, so that would be really giving principals the information to own their own budgets in a way that they had not in the past. And so the same way that we went through a rigorous zero-based process with the departments, it will be expanding that process out to the districts. I'm sorry, to the schools.
Okay, well, one of the things we mentioned that we learned at the leadership conference is that, say, the Title I monies that come in, we've traditionally given that over to the schools to let them decide this is how they will use their money. And his suggestion was that that was not an efficient way to do it, especially if we're trying to make sure that that basic what we call it, the student's baseline experience is equitable, that it would behoove us to do that from the district level. So I don't remember us really having much of a discussion on the school budget ownership. So at some point, I'd like us to discuss that a little further next year. You know, yeah, it doesn't have to be tonight, but that is a big question. And the other question is the healthcare report that Dr. Watt sent to us, showing where districts across the country are having to call in third-party vendors and that kind of thing to help mitigate the health costs per employee. Again, that's a discussion for another day, but something that we need to have in mind while we're voting tonight.
And I have heard loud and clear the opportunity to look at Title I and how that money is distributed. There are federal guidelines that to some extent guide how that money is provided to schools, but there are opportunities to look at district set-asides. One of the things that I'm already thinking about is the money that we're investing in tutoring this year. That could actually be a district set-aside. So instead of using general funds for that, we could move that over to Title I. But we need to do that process with our principals. And as Mr. Jenkins mentioned, a lot of our budget process this year has focused on central office, and we have not extended the capacity building down to the schools. The understanding of the new fiscal reality, I do not think most of our employees really understand what has happened in the last 3 to 4 months, and so that will be a lot of what this work moving forward will look like. We have lived in a bit of luxury for the past few years, and we are now going to have to pivot to some extent to be able to exist in a new reality.
Ms. Grabowski.
I appreciate the comprehensive approach of looking not only at this year, but at future years, and also reflecting back where we've been since you've been with the district. I think it's very helpful, and I also think it demonstrates that you have kept your word from day one of how you saw our financial future and what the steps would be to move us where we are trying to go, particularly in the face of our strategic plan. We asked you a couple of years ago to look at the top level at the 208 to see if there were opportunities to reduce that budget, which you did. We asked you to look at our compensation plan to identify if we were being competitive, which you did. So I say all that to say that I have a high level of confidence in where we are going as a district and evaluating our cost and where we're investing our money. I agree that a slow and steady approach is prudent. We could come, and I know this is not, this maybe is more of a budget, but it does relate to the millage rate because it just builds. I think that this plan, and I'm looking at the slide about the financial management capacity building, gives us a roadmap to know where we are going. And then related to the millage rate, we are in that land of uncertainty. We are seeing, state legislation that is benefiting many property owners, which is great, which is fantastic, but we're having to make those adjustments. And so I just personally appreciate the intentional and strategic approach to looking at how this year's budget will continue to play out in future years, moving forward with the roadmap that you've provided to us.
Alrighty, thank you. I'll turn it over to Dr. Watts for closing comments.
I'll give another pause to make sure we don't have any additional questions.
Could you, I'm sorry, could you go back a few slides? I'm so sorry. You don't even have the slides up there anymore, I'm sorry. I just wanted to look at the historical on, yes, that one. So, and I guess we don't have the slide where we see the growth in fund balance. Because there were a few years where we had significant fund balances. And I can see from the point of view of the public, looking at those fund balances and saying, well, every year, you've increased the fund balance. Will we ever get a break? So I understand that looking at this, the percent of change from prior year, we're down to 3.3%. But even at 3.3%, it was, we will end up with something from our maintaining this millage. It's a little bit concerning. Ms. Campbell?
Since we're talking about this bill and the tax growth history, I know there's some confusion around how exactly it's being applied right now. And everyone knows I'm a huge proponent of this bill, titled Savannah-Chatham County School Tax Relief Act, to do exactly what it's doing. But one thing I would mention is, as far as business owners, renters, et cetera, are concerned, while it's offsetting the cost and tax growth for us as homeowners, and I am definitely all for it, and I hug your legislators for doing this, it is going to, the consequences of this will be more borne out in the taxes that lower income business owners, et cetera, pay to absorb what we are now not paying as homeowners. So just know that we should be held accountable for every dollar that we spend, because the money is still going to come from somewhere when we need it. And along the lines of what Mr. Moss was saying, in 3 years alone, I'll reiterate from the last meeting, I believe it was 23 to 26, I would have to check. Our fund balance grew by $106 to $107 million. So we have had plenty of money left over in years past that we are utilizing in this to keep the millage rate flat, and I'm grateful for that. But I believe that the taxpayers deserve the extra 7 million or less to get a full rollback, so.
Dr. Howard Hall.
When we talk about the fund balance, I know we're hearing a lot about that, and it's been healthy for years. But one of the reasons why is due to vacancies. We've had so many vacancies, and also the ESSER grants. We receive less of the ESSER grant funding because we don't have that anymore. However, when we talk about the cut from central office, there really hadn't been any people actually cut. It's just the vacancies. Dr. Watts has done a great job with actually working diligently to either fill those vacancies or eliminate them. And with that being the case, we're not going to continue to see these extra large boosts in our fund balance. If we do a full rollback, that means that we will have to go in fund balance to get $7 million, which will include the 17 million that we're actually requesting due to, that's 3 factors. One was we actually received we didn't receive all the anticipated state funding. That was one. And then the other was expiring grants. Then again, enrollment decline, which is 17 million. So if we combine that, that's pretty much $24 million that would be deducted from our fund balance. We're not going to see that healthy fund balance anymore. It's pretty much gone. However, I will continue to say that we have departments. As I mentioned, we have $1 million departments, $1 million teams, $1 million programs, $1 million grants, and we must begin to see $1 million results for the upcoming school year because the public, they're watching, and we want to make sure that we're holding everybody accountable, and I think we're on the right track to do that. But when we talk about reducing the budget, this is the beginning of the school year, and if we want to eliminate positions, that should happen at the end of this school year, not the beginning. We talk about trimming the fat. We have to be careful that we don't trim the fat down to the bone, which can cause pain for the entire district.
Ms. Hall?
I just want to remind everybody of the reason that we're all here as board members is to make sure that we produce new taxpayers. We want these children who we're educating to be property owners, business owners who are able to pay taxes. And in order to do that, I think our first big leap is this strategic plan for the next 5 years. And if we can fund it and be, our fidelity stays with it, and we don't come up with a lot of, changes and amendments to this budget over the year, that we'll be on our way to doing that, which is what we've always been. But let's think about the future taxpayers as well as the current ones, because that's our job. We're not really here to just protect and look out for current taxpayers. We're looking for those future ones who are our children.
Anyone else? Okay.
Alrighty, thank you all.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much, A&M. You guys have been, you have been a lifesaver. All right. So we need, yes. Here we go.
Good afternoon. Good evening. Yes. Calendar year 2026, fiscal year 2027, final recommended tax millage levy. Under Georgia law, the Board of Public Education for the City of Savannah and the County of Chatham is a recommending authority that exercises the power to cause the levying authority, the Chatham County Commission, to levy property taxes to carry out the purposes of the Board of Education. In accordance with the law and policy, it is necessary for the board to adopt the recommended calendar year 2026 millage rates for both maintenance and operations and general obligation board indebtedness and their corresponding levies on taxable property. The calendar year 2026 millage rates used in the projection of revenue for the fiscal year 2027 budget are 17.331 mills for maintenance and operations and 0 mil for general obligation debt, for a combined millage rate of 17.331 mills. See the adopted budget for fiscal year 2027, budget for all funds at the June 24th, 26 board meeting. The proposed millage rate for maintenance and operations is not in compliance with the rollback rate calculated by the tax assessor as required by OCGA 48-5-32.1, and as such was advertised as a tax increase of 1.65% above the rollback millage rate, and the district held 3 public hearings as required by Georgia law. Final adoption of these millage rates is required at this time to meet statutory timelines for millage adoption. Accordingly, staff proposes these millage rates to be adopted. Thus be it resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent that the Board of Public Education for the City of Savannah and the County of Chatham, as provided by law, does hereby recommend to the Chatham County Commissioners and ex officio judges thereof that there be levied upon the dollar of all taxable property in Chatham County, Georgia, a general fund tax of 17.331 mills, general obligation bond tax rate of 0 mil, and an aggregate millage rate of 17.331 mills in the year of 2026 for the support and maintenance of public education. Direct staff to advertise such recommended millage rates as required by law, and direct the secretary of the board or designee to transmit a certified copy of this resolution to the Chatham County Board of Commissioners.
I'll accept a motion. It's been moved.
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded. Discussion? Ms. Campbell?
Okay, so one thing that we can say is that I've been very consistent this year. I definitely like the conversation that has taken place this year, and we have moved to a renewed commitment for organizational restructuring, staffing reviews, efficiencies, long-term financial sustainability. All of this is great. It went from saying 85% are people, what else can we do, to talking about these things very seriously. And these are important conversations, and they're necessary. And I'm very grateful to Finance and Dr. Watts and her team for making these things front and center and committing to this in the future. Where I disagree, respectfully, is that taxpayers shouldn't have to finance just the promise of future efficiency. They should get the efficiency demonstrated first. And while a lot of this doesn't fall on Dr. Watts and Dr. Watts' team, this was long occurring before she ever showed up, and she has done a lot to better this ship. Like I said earlier, in 3 years alone, we collected over $100 million. So tonight we have the opportunity to return roughly 6.9 to 7 million back to the taxpayer, just in order to say to them, we don't expect you to give us another 7 million that we may or may not potentially store again because we have overcollected or underspent. I think A&M has done a very good job getting us on the right track, making sure we budget effectively, and we have a ton of work to do going forward. But even slide 16 from the presentation that A&M just gave, which was excellent, said that if we do this, we offer the rollback and it's just a mere roughly $7 million, that we would still have approximately $28 million above the board's minimum reserve. So I kind of struggle, it's $7 million. I struggle to see why we wouldn't be willing to make this commitment to offering the taxpayer a rollback without just the commitments, not that they aren't real, but because they have earned the right to expect it, I believe. I believe that stewardship calls us to provide a rollback. We could still fund this year's budget, protect our reserves, and give the money back to taxpayers, a small amount of it. So I believe that it's really about accountability, which I know everyone knows is like my favorite word. But I think the taxpayer wants to know that these things are not aspirational, that structural reforms are coming, and that we are doing this in order to demonstrate an effort to do what we say we're going to do. So since the taxpayers have been very generous, as Dr. Watts very astutely said at the beginning, to us in the past, I think we should demonstrate that generosity to the taxpayer in return. So we would just give them back what we don't need today, as we have already said, spending what we keep with discipline, which I know we have committed to, and that way when we earn the right next year to ask for the privilege of more money with less, scrutiny, because we're being better stewards. So rather than simply voting against the recommendation before us, I'm sure that will come, I would like to offer respectfully an alternative. So based on the presentation, like I said, slide 16, that said we would still be roughly 28 million above our minimum reserve policy. I would move to amend the pending resolution by striking 17.331 mils and inserting 17.049 mils, the rollback rate. And if necessary, I can stipulate with that we would also pull that roughly $6.9 million out of our unreserved fund balance to offset the additional cost, because I think we have all agreed, I don't want to speak for anyone, but we voted on it recently, that we support the budget as recommended by Dr. Watts. I know I do. And this would be a way to achieve that and offer some sort of rebate back to the taxpayer.
Okay, we have an amended motion. Do we have a second? I will second that motion. Discussion. Yes.
Ms. Campbell, you're definitely consistent. You are. And that's, I appreciate that. I guess I'll present looking down the road, because I think we have to. On the surface, taking $7 million out of fund balance right now really doesn't sound like that big of a deal. It's, we have a healthy fund balance. But if we look forward to next year, based on the information presented, that gives us a cushion of $28 million. We reduce our millage rate. That's going to, and if we stay on, all things staying the same, which we know they probably won't, all things staying the same, it would continue a trajectory where we would also need fund balance next year, and that would wipe out the remaining cushion of our fund balance. And that's not even looking at the rest of the fiscal realities that have been presented by the financial team. The other piece of that is reducing the millage now, knowing that these other fiscal realities are out there, again, projecting forward. The way to make up any future gap would be to then increase the millage rate at a future point, which I don't see this board wanting to do. We have an aggressive and excellent strategic plan that we are all committed to doing. So to simply, and it's not simple, but to shift the $7 million, if it was just a $7 million shift, I'd probably be okay with it. But combining that with reducing the millage rate and projecting out the additional gap that would remain in future years, given the changes that have occurred in our financial setting, I just think is too much of a risk for us to take when we are setting forth on a path that we are already seeing positive results. We know positive change is happening in our school. We know that we can attract students back to our district through these positive results, increase our numbers, and start to right this ship. But right now, there are so many external factors that are beyond our control that I think to do the full rollback this year without having the additional analysis of where we can make those strategic staff changes is going to put us in a more precarious position in future years that would risk the continued success of the full implementation of our strategic plan.
Dr. Howard Hall.
And I agree with Ms. Grabowska. We need to really focus on having long-term financial stability. And I don't see that happening with a full rollback, because what would eventually happen, we're taking a risk of having to increase the millage rate next year because we might be in a deficit. So I think that a full rollback at this time is not the most conducive decision to make, being to the fact that that would be an additional $6.9, approximately $7 million to come out of our fund balance, which would no longer be a healthy, robust fund balance due to vacancies being filled, due to grants that we will no longer receive, along with other expenses that we'll incur for the next year or so.
So I'm hearing all of this. One thing I'm not hearing is what about us just adjusting our budgets? And, you know, this only affects us if we keep our budget, if we keep going the way that we are going now, without making those hard decisions about staffing, without, as a friend of mine who's in the military asked me yesterday, he goes, do you guys know, understand right sizing? Without right sizing, if we don't right size, oh, absolutely, we'll be coming back for a millage increase every year. Without selling some properties that we need to, absolutely, we'll be coming back for increase every year. You know, what we're hearing from the public is live within your means and understanding that every family in America is going through this right now. Every family in America is having to make some really hard decisions. And they're uncomfortable decisions. But every family in America doesn't have taxpayers to fund them. So I get both sides, guys. Guys, you all know I'm Libra. So I do get both sides, but what I'm not hearing, and what I've heard a lot is, well, let's just wait another year. Let's see what happens with the strategic plan. If I could hear a guarantee that we would have this, have our staff right-sized and cutting all of the fat out of our budget, I could wait, but it's been every year. Ms. Campbell.
You took part of the words right out of my mouth. So one thing I did want to, I guess, last comment, not going to rebut everything. I appreciate where my fellow board members are coming from, and I know where they stand, and I respect that. But I don't want it to look I don't want it to be taken as, well, next year we may have to increase the millage rate. Quite honestly, we should have no reason having a problem increasing the millage rate if it's money that we actually need. We just should have to justify every dollar. So this bill doesn't preclude us, HB 782, from ever increasing it or decreasing it or keeping it the same. It's just that people want each dollar justified. And so next year, we shouldn't have to pull out any money from our unreserved fund balance because we should have right size by then. And I'll say in closing here that for me, as many of you know, and I hope you believe, it's less about the money than it is about the efficiency and the effectiveness of every position that gets filled. Because when you have a bunch of people right over top of a bunch of, slightly more people, and then they're over more people, it becomes very structurally inefficient where no one's accountable. No one knows, who they're responsible for, or what they're responsible for. This becomes something where right sizing, yes, does help our budget, and it should because again, enrollment has declined. But I know that Dr. Watts and her cabinet have an absolutely outstanding, just very specific, metric-driven strategic plan that I also fear will not work if we do not make this a very effective and efficient workforce where it's not just shared accountability, there's true accountability, and people know what's in their job descriptions and who they're responsible for and what they are responsible for. So I appreciate everyone hearing me out, and I'll let that be my piece.
Can I speak?
Yes, Dr. Bringman.
Evening, thank you for letting me call in. I've thought about this, knowing that Ms. Campbell would make an amendment. I fully support the budget. I fully support the process. I understand where all of, literally every board member is coming from with their comments about the budget and the millage. The more I thought about this and reflected on it, I could support using this amount of fund balance because I support its usage more than I support our district using fund balance for 208 Bulls. I was against that, and we have set aside more than $7 million from fund balance to help with that project. So in keeping with that same line of thought, I could support this motion.
Anyone else? Mr. Smith?
We're getting ready to vote on the amendment.
On the amendment, yes. Yes, there being no more discussion, all in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
That is 3 to the rest of it. Yeah.
You have to oppose.
Oh, I'm sorry, all of those opposed. Right. Thank you very much. All right, now we will have discussion on, well, yes, we can have more discussion on the original motion. If there is there any more discussion on the original motion? There being none, all in favor? All opposed?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Hang on. The motion, the original motion did pass. All right, I'll now accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Y'all have a great night.